Class, welcome to week 4. We have our readings that are listed in the syllabus, also in the week 4 introduction module. Keep in mind that the original discussion boards posts are due Thursday, and then the reply posts are due Friday. That's been in the syllabus. Y'all already know that. Just a reminder. Boom, boom, boom. Oh, okay. And so this week we're going to read delinquent subcultures and subcultures of delinquency. That should be chapter 6 for most of you, depending on what edition you have. But don't really mind the chapter so much as the chapter title that tells you what you need to read. So delinquent subcultures and subcultures of delinquency. I've already written all the notes for you from that chapter, and I've posted it on Canvas. As I have every single chapter, I've written out and typed out all the notes for you. So do use those notes as you read along. I think they'll be very helpful in your grasping and understanding the material, as well as those notes are very, I think, helpful for your exam. And the other thing you'll read is the labeling perspective, and you should find that within chapter 7. And so then, of course, you're going to have your discussion board. And so let me talk to you a little bit about some of your readings. First, delinquent subcultures and subcultures of delinquency. This is mostly from an American perspective. Some of my favorite theories, subcultural theories, come from England, in particular the Birmingham School. As I've said before, one of my favorite books ever in delinquency and in criminology really is The Rise of Youth Resistant Subcultures. It's called Resistance Through Rituals. And it's all about the emergence of subculture in post-World War II England. And there you saw the emergence of the teddy boys, the mods, punks, rastas, etc. And ultimately, these were working class lads, working class kids that were responding to the same structural conditions of their parents, but they had a different response. Their parents, they went to the factory work and they just lived out their kind of working class lives working in factories. But these working class kids that inherited the same plight, the same class, and the same structural conditions as their working class parents had a different cultural response to their structural positions. They wanted to resist faculty or factory life. And so they created a deviant subculture that was anti-authoritarian, anti-job, anti-capitalism. That's why the punks had big mohawks and anarchists. They were all anarchists, and they had punk music that was always resistant and challenging to authority. They put tattoos all over. They put earrings all over, and they became a youth resistant subculture. What were they resisting? Well, they were resisting their structural positions as working class members, doomed towards a lifetime of factory work, which generally sucks. They wanted to fight for freedom. They wanted to fight for independence. They wanted to fight against authority, against power, against domination. And they found a creative cultural way to act back against the structural expectations that were imposed upon them. And so really exciting stuff. It's some of my favorite sociology. But nonetheless, you're getting here pretty much an understanding of delinquent subcultures from still progressive, but from an American kind of perspective. And so in my notes and in the chapter, you'll first be introduced to Cohen's Delinquent Boys, and there we have definitions of culture, and then a subculture, which oftentimes is part of the dominant culture, but it resists aspects of the dominant culture. So it challenges the dominant culture of knowledge, beliefs, codes, tastes, prejudices, etc. And so subcultures generally challenge the dominant or the superior culture and offer a new way of thinking, a new way of doing things, a new way of life that is oftentimes, but not necessarily, but again, oftentimes threatening to orthodoxy, threatening of the dominant culture. And so here Cohen, he will talk about 6 major characteristics of subcultures of delinquent boys. For example, that they're non-utilitarian and malicious, that they engage in short-run hedonism. These are just examples. Autonomy, working class membership, that they tend to be male. And of course, one has to question, does this really apply to just working class delinquent boys, or what about Wall Street executives? And I've spent time in Wall Street. I lived in New York City, of course, for a long time, and I can tell you a lot of these same so-called working class characteristics belong to wealthy Wall Street executives and CEOs and brokers. So anyway, check that out. Let's see, going through the notes. Surprisingly, you'll notice that oftentimes women or girls have been ignored in the studies of subcultures. In the 1970s, some scholars like Lorraine LeBlanc started working on looking at women and youth-resistant subcultures. And Lorraine LeBlanc looked specifically at punks in the 1970s and how girls or women were part of the punk youth resistant subcultures, but the girls did it differently than the boys did. And so it wasn't really until the 1990s and 2000s where scholars and subcultural theorists really started focusing on women and girls as being part of youth resistant subcultures. And a recent book came out, well, I guess it's not too recent, but not too long ago. Jody Miller wrote a book called Getting Played, and it's about how young women in the inner city, in this particular case in St. Louis, how they also formed kind of a youth resistant subcultures, and how they took on dominant and even masculine, how these women took on dominant, even masculine roles in the community, since we have a criminal justice system that locks up so many people, especially disproportionate to race, that a lot of Black inner city young men, as well as older men, are lavishing in prison, leaving no protection in a lot of these communities. And so women have taken on a kind of a dominant or a pariah, what she calls a pariah femininity, a dominant masculine role in the community to take the place of protecting the neighborhoods, because so many of the young men have been locked up and imprisoned in our criminal justice system. Anyhow, so Cohen, so you'll see a lot of that's missing with girls, and that's on purpose. These are men writing in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and they're looking at everything from kind of a male patriarchal kinds of lens, and they kind of discounted women. So it wasn't until later that women were brought into the picture. Sarah Thornton is also another good scholar for those of you that are interested in women's perspectives on subculture. So you have Lorraine LeBlanc, which is pretty good. You have Julie Miller, that's pretty good. And then Sarah Thornton, who did some pretty good work on looking at female youth resistant subcultures, or at least women within youth resistant subcultures. But a lot of American sociology and criminology ignored that, again, until recently. Okay, then we have Walter Miller's Delinquency and Lower Class Culture. And he talks about kind of the values that lower class people have and how they're somewhat different from middle class values. Of course, we should question all these things. We shouldn't look at these theories as they're true. All theories should be questioned. All theories should be scrutinized. All theories should be examined. And that's our job, of course, in this class, to look at what are the positives and negatives of the theory, what are their strengths and weaknesses, et cetera. And so if you haven't noticed, I constantly encourage you to do all of those things and ask you to do those things. That's why in a lot of the discussion boards, when I reply to you, I'm just kind of playing devil's advocate. So don't take personally a lot of the things that I say. I'm just trying to ask probing questions, getting you to think more. I'm not necessarily giving you my beliefs or my ideas. Again, I'm often playing devil's advocate, just trying to provoke you a little bit to think a little bit further and deeper. So don't take anything personally. It's just my job as a professor to introduce you new ideas, to get you to question things, talk more, etc. Okay. And then we'll go into Cloward and Olin's delinquency and opportunity structure. And I think that's very important because you can't just be delinquent and become a drug dealer. You need to have an opportunity structure. There needs to be already an informal economy, an alternative institutional, even if it's underground, opportunity to engage in illicit, underground, informal, or otherwise criminal activity. So we have access to an opportunity structure as working and middle class people. Like, for example, we have access to UWL, whether it's a student or a professor. We have access to, in other words, the world of work and careerism, where a lot of people don't have access to those opportunity structures that we have access to. They've been excluded from those opportunity structures. And so, but people can't become delinquent unless there's an alternative opportunity structure for them to advance and engage in alternative types of careers, even though those are considered criminal careers. And so he talks about, so Cloward and Olin talk about the importance of, they need to have, being delinquent is not the same. Being excluded is not sufficient enough, but you have to be not only excluded from mainstream legitimate opportunities for success, but you also have to have available an alternative opportunity structure of employment in the informal illicit economy in order to become delinquent. And so he talks about the different types of that, the criminal subculture, conflict subculture, treatise subculture. So take a look at that. Then you'll get into David Motz's Delinquency and Drift. I really like that. So pay attention to his type of soft, deterministic type of approach. And he's going to talk about how, mostly delinquent people don't want to be delinquent. They want to be kind of, normal, part of everyday society. And they want to be thought of as being moral and good people, and etc. And so they develop techniques of neutralization, the denial of responsibility, denial of injury, denial of victim, condemnation of condemners, and appeal to higher loyalties. And so I give examples, but there's also examples in the book of each one of those. Of course, I ask you, have you ever used any of these techniques of neutralization? Do they really only apply to delinquent boys or delinquent people, or to delinquent youth, or to criminals? Or have we all done these things? And so think about that. But it's really good. So check out those 5 techniques of neutralization. I think you'll like that. Then you get into control theories, Walter Reckless's containment theory, and then Travis Hershey's social control. And basically they talk about the different types of social pressures and social pulls that lead you or not to delinquency or criminality, as well as outward containments and inward containments that impact social control and can kind of predict whether or not someone will become delinquent or not. So pay attention to the social pressures, social pulls, outer containments, and inner containments that bring one towards or away from criminality. Okay, and let's see. Yep. Okay, good. I even have some questions there at the end of the notes for you to think about that might help with midterm exam, and just to thinking about some of the questions and concepts that are in this chapter. So check that out. Then after this, you'll have a reading on the labeling theory. I've given notes on labeling theory. I think there's even 2 different documents. They look very similar. So you can just kind of pick which one. But be able to distinguish. But by the way, the seminal figure in labeling theory, which is part of symbolic interactionism. So symbolic interactionism is a grand perspective within sociology, and labeling theory falls within symbolic interactionism. Also, it also relates, though, to a critical or conflict perspective. And it was nonetheless then former jazz musician turned sociologist Howard Becker, who really wrote the book on labeling theory, and his book was called Delinquency, actually, or no, it's called Deviancy. And so really good book. And here he outlines the theoretical and methodological implications for a labeling theory, which I find very compelling and very powerful, by the way. And so anyway, so notice the difference between primary deviancy. That's where you commit deviant acts, but there's no label that really sticks. And then secondary deviancy, where there's a label that basically sticks to you. And then it almost becomes, and it's that label is sustained all the time. Keep in mind, though, the power relationships that are defined. If you're a student, you can't label a teacher as delinquent or as criminal or as really anything, because as a student, you're powerless. Based upon your attachment to an institution. Within the hierarchy of education, students are generally not very high, and so they lack the power to label the teacher as anything. But because the teacher is in a higher hierarchical position within the institution of education, the teacher has the power to take a label and apply it to the more powerless students. So the students can be called developmentally disturbed, or mentally challenged, or mentally disturbed, or somehow disobedient, or whatever silly terms they use in education to use violent labels against kids. That's what you see. And so the point is that usually powerful people get to label powerless people as something very negative, something very stigmatizing, something that can hurt them. But powerless people can label the powerful as with some type of negative type of label. So Biden, for example, the president of the United States, maybe not, he's engaged in international war crimes, where he is now a criminal for terrorizing people around the world, dropping bombs on them and killing people unprovoked. But we, as people, don't have the power to label Biden as a criminal or a terrorist. Whether he is or is not, I'm not saying. I'm just saying we are powerless because of our lack of power to label Biden something like a criminal or a war criminal or a warmonger, because he has more power than us. However, the government, including Biden, they can label us. Regardless of our actions, if they're positive or negative, regardless of our actions, they can label us as something negative and stigmatizing, because they simply have the power to do so because of their attachment to an institution. So it's always powerful people that can label powerless people something negative that could harm them or hurt them or stigmatize them, and with very real consequences, by the way. And so anytime we talk about labeling, who has the power to do the labeling? Who doesn't have the power to do labeling? Who do these labels benefit? These are the type of sociological questions we have to ask when it comes to labeling theory. Then you'll see deviant career, and as continued secondary deviance. Once you become labeled as deviant and known as deviant, people end up accepting that deviant, and then they continue this deviant type of career. And so, of course, what a labeling theorist would argue was that stop labeling people. These labels lead to stigmas that become self-fulfilling prophecies, and so we should stop this labeling, period. And so this has radical implications, of course, that we should take away labels that we give in our educational systems to young people, labels that we give to criminals, labels that we give to people in the Middle East, labels that we give to asylum seekers, labels that we give to migrants and immigrants, labels that we give to inner city kids, like, for example, Hillary Clinton's highly racist remarks about super predators, referring to Black inner city youth. And so the labeling theorists would say we need to radically engage in non-intervention to not label and stigmatize people anymore, especially institutionally vulnerable people who can't defend themselves against labels that create these stigmas that end up hurting their life chances. And so check that out. Okay. And I ask you to apply labeling theory in different ways, but most importantly, you're going to have an outside reading where you apply the theories we've talked about, the delinquent subculture theory and the labeling theory, to a small but brilliant classical article I have you read called "The Saints and Roughnecks," Chamblis's classic study, the Saints and the Roughnecks. So our discussion board, by the way, I try to be very imaginative in these discussion boards. I try to make them fun for you and creative and thoughtful. So hopefully you're enjoying them. So your discussion board this week will be to apply labeling theory as well as the subcultural theories to make sense of the article Saints and the Roughnecks. And then I ask you, well, what should we do then? What should we do to solve the problem of delinquency if these theories are true? So that what happened in the Saints and Roughnecks doesn't continue happening to so many people in the world today. So I really hope that you enjoy that. Okay, that's all. And so I hope hope this video was useful. Again, I'll try to post videos every week when I can. It may not happen every week, but most weeks. At some point later in the semester, I'm going to offer extended office hours if anybody who wants to meet with me can, to discuss anything you would like, especially class related. But otherwise, y'all are doing a great job. I really love reading the discussion boards and the posts and the replies. Keep your replies going critical. And y'all are doing a great job. So keep up the excellent work. I'm impressed. All right, take care. Have a great week.